Greetings for this lecture. We're going to talk about the politics of Amilcar Cabral. This is a compilation of information I've compiled from books, documentaries, and all sorts of other areas. How was it possible for Guinea-Bissau, with no access to modern technology, ideas, or organizational forms, its populace suffering under one of the most repressive of all colonial regimes, to build a victorious movement for revolutionary change? A key to understanding this process lies in the writings of Amilcar Cabral, one of the great revolutionary leaders, produced by the long and arduous campaign for the liberation of Portuguese-dominated Africa, of Angola, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, and Sao Tome. Cabral launched the Partido Africano de Independencia de Guinea y Cabo Verde, PAIGC, in 1956, and by 1973, when he was assassinated, his movement had effectively defeated the Portuguese colonialists. As Basil Davidson states in his introduction, Cabral can be recognized, even now, as being among the great figures of our time. We do not need to wait for history's judgment to tell us that. The evidence is available. Almost this evidence are the texts that follow here. We're going to go down the rabbit hole and one of the greatest political minds that ever lived. So keep up, embrace yourselves. Amilcar Cabral, 1924 to 1973, was a Guinean engineer, anti-colonial theorist, and revolutionary. He helped to found and lead the anti-colonial struggle against Portuguese colonialism and was assassinated months before the independence forces were victorious. Yeah, back in the 1960s and even during other times, Africa was under control of European powers and being exploited to no end and oppressed. Mentally, physically, all that. And one by one, the nations began to fight for independence to control their own resources and country. And this is one success story that was made not possible by one man, but there was definitely one man that helped pull it together. And inspired generations of fighters, of real conscious fighters. Amilcar Cabral, the head of the PAIGC, Guinea-Bissau's nationalist movement, and one of Africa's foremost revolutionary leaders. Now we're going to go to some of his own quotations. In less than 20 years of active political life, not yet, they're still talking about him. In less than 20 years of active political life, Cabral led Guinea-Bissau's nationalists to the most complete political and military success ever achieved by an African political movement against a colonial power. But at the time of his death in 1973, months before Guinea-Bissau became independent, his influence extended well beyond the Lusophone world and Africa. Friends and foes alike admired his political acumen and skills and assigned him a potential leader of the non-aligned movement. His writings have shown him to be a sophisticated analyst of the social, economic, and political factors which have affected and continue to affect the developing world. At a time when there is a general sense of despondency about the future of Africa, as well as a cynicism about its political elites, it is instructive to be reminded that the continent produced a political leader of Cabral's caliber. Okay, now we're going to go on to some of Cabral's writings. In his own words, The Social Situation by Amilcar Cabral of the African population in Angola, Guinea, and Mozambique. 99.7% are classified as uncivilized by Portuguese colonial laws, and 0.3% are considered to be assimilados. For an uncivilized person to attain the status of assimilado, he has to prove his economic stability and a standard of living higher than that enjoyed by a large majority of the population of Portugal. He must live in the European manner, have paid all his taxes, have done his military service, and know how to read and write Portuguese correctly. If the Portuguese people themselves were asked to fulfill these conditions, well over 50% of the population would not have the necessary requirements for becoming civilized or assimilado. The so-called uncivilized African is treated as a chattel and is at the mercy of the will and caprice of the colonial administration and the settlers. His situation is absolutely necessary to the existence of the Portuguese colonial system and provides an inexhaustible supply of forced labor and labor for export. By classifying him as uncivilized, the law gives legal sanction to racial discrimination and provides one of the justifications for Portuguese domination in Africa. The tiny minority of so called civilized Africans, who are theoretically considered to be Portuguese citizens, do not enjoy the privileges reserved for Europeans. Some find themselves in an isolated position between the mass of the African people and the settlers, and are discriminated against by the latter, either in an open or veiled manner. One of them actually live in similar Most of them actually live in similar conditions to those which are legally imposed on the uncivilized Africans. Portuguese multiracialism is a myth. It really means complete racial segregation except for contact through work, where it furthers the interests of colonialism. With very few exceptions, such can also be found in South Africa. There is no social contact between African and European families. It is only in the schools and other places outside the family environment that European children come into direct contact with the few assimilado children who attend schools. The children mix together in innocence, but these relationships also contain prejudices and complexes. Cinemas, cafes, bars, restaurants, and so on are almost exclusively frequented by Europeans. Any African bold enough to enter one of these places must be prepared to face humiliation. In the towns of Lourenço Marques and Beira, Mozambique, Nova Lisboa and Lobito, Angola, racial segregation is openly practiced. Portuguese racism hardly existed at the beginning of the period of colonization. It was born and increased as the size of the European population grew. It is no accident that of the 10 million inhabitants of Angola and Mozambique, there are only 60,000 colorids, and for the past century, the size of this colored population has remained almost static. Nearly all of them are illegitimate children who have been abandoned by European fathers. A mixed couple, especially an African man and a European woman, is always a target for the insults and mockery of the settlers, so much so that the very few existing couples do not usually show themselves in public. So these kind of, if I could break away for a moment, these kind of issues are global. You think the 1960s human rights movement was one thing? It's all over the world. The discrimination was all over the world. It wasn't exclusive to America. As Amilcar Cabral will point out, that the same thing that Malcolm X pointed out, that the struggles of African Americans and Africans in Africa is linked as one giant struggle against one main enemy. Anyhow, in country districts, the Africans must suffer very miserable conditions. In the towns, the uncivilized Africans live in areas which are being moved further and further from the town centers. In squalid shanty towns, such as Muzex in Luanda, few houses occupied by Africans could be considered as habitable by any standards of decency. These were built by the authorities in a selected area, as is the case in South Africa. After overcoming innumerable obstacles, a few assimilados managed to acquire a reasonably decent home. This is only achieved by the handful of Africans who have been to university and by the ever decreasing number of who are able to gain public employment despite racialism. These people are always cited in colonial propaganda. Most of the Europeans, however, live in vivendas, some of which are real colonial palaces comparable to the richest homes in Portugal. Uncivilized Africans, especially in the towns, have to carry passes and obey a 9 p.m. curfew. A wise assimilado always carries his identity card, which, when accepted by the authorities and settlers, is his only valid proof of being a human being. What is resistance? By Amilcar Cabral. Resistance is a natural thing. All force that exerts itself on a particular thing gives rise to a resistance, that is, a counterforce. And the counterforce to the colonial and imperial force is the movement of national liberation. This can only be resolved with political effort or in certain conditions. It can take the form of armed struggle, which is our specific case. And so little by little, in the context of this general resistance, various types of resistance are defined. It's fundamental that even militant or leader that every militant or leader becomes clearly aware of those type of resistance. but it's more important still to know why we resist. For what end we make resistance. We should know the objectives of resistance well. Resistance is the following: to destroy one thing for the sake of constructing another thing. That is resistance. What is it we want to destroy in our land? The colonial domination of the Tugas. Only that? No. At the same time, we don't want any other type of colonial domination in our land, any other type of foreign domination whatsoever. We want our people to direct its own destiny through its children in Guinea and Cape Verde. This is what we want in the first place. But on the basis of our party's life, we want to destroy every possibility of those who could liberate our land or any others, only to come abuse our people tomorrow. Our objective cannot be to go and tend to the governor's palace, only to do in our land what the governor would like to do, nor with the house of the district officer or administrator. Our objective is to break with the colonial state in our land, to create a new state different on the basis of justice, work, and equality of opportunity for all the children of our land in Guinea and Cape Verde. We want, therefore, to destroy everything that would be an obstacle to the progress of our people, all the relations that there are in our society in Guinea and Cape Verde, be they against the progress of our people or against the liberty of our people. At the end of the day, we want the following: concrete and equal possibilities for any child of our land, man or woman, to advance as a human being, to give all of his or her capacity, to develop his or her body and spirit, in order to be a man or a woman at the height of his or her actual ability. We have to destroy everything that will be against this in our land. Comrades, step by step, one by one, if it is necessary, but we have to destroy in order to construct a new life. This is the principal objective of our resistance. Economic Resistance by Amilcar Cabral. Today we're going to talk a bit about another important aspect of resistance, which is economic resistance. As you comrades know, our struggle is a political struggle because we seek to conquer the rights of our people who should be free, sovereign, which means self-directing, conquering our land's national independence. But on the basis of this truth, there is the following truth. Colonialism is primarily an economic domination. Colonialism, or imperialist domination, in the first place, seeks to dominate other peoples economically. To this end, it redoubles political domination and prolongs the forces of the imperialist or colonial state in our land, which it wants to dominate economically. For this very reason, we should say that the first objective of our resistance and struggle at the bottom is to liberate our land economically, although beforehand we have to pass through political liberation. This means that our land is only truly liberated if it manages to throw off the foreign domination of a country's economy. If we in fact manage to liberate the economy of our country from all foreign exploitation, this is liberation of a land dominated by colonialists. This means that every land has its natural resources and its population, which is a land's greatest richness. The population, to the extent that it develops its capacity for labor, for production of its already real or potential natural riches, and for the means of production, all of this is subordinated to imperialist domination, isn't free, and doesn't develop freely in the epoch of colonial or imperial domination. To actually win independence consists in being able to freely develop that set of things called the productive forces of a land. Therefore, you see that at bottom, our resistance functions to resolve an economic problem, although it has to pass through politics, and politics is always very important. This is the greatest importance of our economic resistance. Fighting, taking up arms, and going on strike are too easy, but fighting with arms in one's hands isn't enough. It's necessary to struggle with political consciousness in one's head. It's necessary that we be more aware of it, that it's the consciousness of a man that guides the gun, and not the gun that guides his consciousness. The gun counts because the man is behind it, grasping it, and it's worth more. The more the consciousness of the man is worse, the more the man's consciousness served a well-defined, clear, and just cause. We have to clearly define our political consciousness because the enemy exerts political pressure in order to destroy our political resistance. As much inside as outside our land, we have to clearly define our political resistance, what we should do. There is a lot we need to define. Whoever doesn't know that, if they don't know, it's because they didn't concern them to know it well. The colonialists usually say that it was they who brought us into history. Today we show that this is not so. They made us leave history, our history, to follow them right at the back, to follow the progress of their history. One of the most serious errors, if not the most serious error, committed by the colonial powers in Africa may have been to ignore or underestimate the cultural strengths of African peoples. I am a simple African man, doing my duty in my country in the context of our time. Any action, regardless of its motives, is sterile unless it produces practical and concrete results. A person who spits at the sun succeeds only in dirtying his own face. If there are difficulties, say it clearly. If we're winning, say it clearly. If we're losing, say it clearly. Because in every struggle, there are not only victories. If there were only victories, no struggles would exist anywhere. There are victories and defeats, hopeless difficulties at times. But we keep moving forward. We have to search to instruct the masses of our land, clearly showing them the intention of the enemy and not allowing the enemy to delude them. This is a fundamental task for us, comrades, and unfortunately some comrades have forgotten it. We are not going to use this platform to rail against imperialism. An African saying very common in our country says, when your house is burning, it's no use beating the tom-toms. In a tricontinental level, this means that we are not going to eliminate imperialism by shouting insults against it. For us, the best or worst shout against imperialism, whatever its form, is to take up arms and fight. This is what we are doing, and this is what we will go on doing until our foreign domination of our African homelands has been totally eliminated. Hide nothing from the masses of our people. Tell no lies. Expose lies wherever they are told. Mask no difficulties, mistakes, failures. Claim no easy victories. Our people, whose desire and determination to free themselves from the colonial yoke have been reinforced by the Resolution 1514, now have a legal basis to demand the liquidation of the Portuguese colonial system, or failing this, to use any means at their disposal to destroy that system. A people who free themselves from foreign domination will not be culturally free unless without underestimating the importance of positive contributions from the oppressor's culture and other cultures, they return to the upwards paths of their own culture. The latter is nourished by the living reality of the environment and rejects harmful influences as much as any kind of subjection to foreign cultures. We see therefore that if imperialist domination has the vital need to practice cultural oppression, national liberation is necessarily an act of culture. There is a preconception held by many people, even on the left, that imperialism made us enter history at the moment when it began its adventure in our countries. Our opinion is exactly that contrary. We consider that when imperialism arrived in Guinea, it made us leave history, our history. Somebody has asked which class is the agent of history. Here a distinction must be drawn between colonial history and our history as human societies. As a dominated people, we only present one ensemble vis-a-vis the oppressor. What commands history in colonial conditions is not the class struggle. I do not mean that the class struggle in Guinea stopped completely during the colonial period. It continued, but in a muted way. In the colonial period, it is the colonial state which commands history. Always remember that the people are not fighting for ideas, nor for what is in men's minds. The people fight and accept sacrifices demanded by the struggle in order to gain material advantages, to live better and in peace, to benefit from progress, and for the better future of their children. National liberation, the struggle against colonialism, the construction of peace, progress, and independence are hollow words devoid of any significance unless they can be translated into a real improvement of living conditions. Amilcar Cabral's message to African Americans. I am bringing to you, our African brothers and sisters of the U.S., the fraternal salutations of our people in assuring you we are very conscious that all in this life concerning you also concerns us. If we do not always pronounce words that clearly show this, it doesn't mean that we are not conscious of it. It is a reality, in considering that the world is being made smaller each day. All people are becoming conscious of this fact. We try to understand your situation in this country. You can be sure that we realize the difficulties you face, the problems you have in your feelings, your revolts, and also your hopes. We think that our fighting for Africa against colonialism and imperialism is a proof of understanding of your problem and also a contribution for the solution of your problems in this continent. Naturally, the inverse is also true. All the achievements towards the solution of your problems here are real contributions to our own struggle. And we are very encouraged in our struggle by the fact that each day more of the African people born in America become conscious of their responsibilities to the struggle in Africa. We think that all you can do here to develop your own conditions is the sense of progress, in the sense of history, and in the sense of the total realization of your aspirations as human beings as a contribution for us. It is also a contribution for you to never forget that you are Africans. And this is when he went to a meeting in New York City, or New York. We are very happy to be with you, our brothers and sisters. I tell you frankly, although it might hurt my visit to the United Nations, each day I feel myself more identified with you. I am not racist, but each day I realize that if I did not have to do what I have to do in my country, maybe I would come here to join you. We never mobilize our people on the basis of struggle against colonialism. It does not work. To speak of the struggle against imperialism simply does not work here. Instead, we use a simple language. We had to avoid giving the peasants the impression that we were strangers who had come to teach them lessons. We placed ourselves in the situation of someone who has come to learn, and slowly the villagers discovered by themselves that there is exploitation. The first thing I would do was to ask for the Almen Grande. I would ask to be granted his hospitality. He would expect me to stay to eat with him. It was very rare that both chicken and rice would be served. I would say, Papa, why aren't you giving me anything else but rice? I am poor. I don't have any chicken. Why? Why are you asking me these questions, son? Yes, I used to have cattle, but the white man took everything away with that tax. By that point, I had had the chance to size up the old man. Papa, tell me, if something happened to come along that would make it possible for you to have a better life tomorrow, would you go along with it? I would go along with it. On August 3, 1959, at a crucial juncture in the history of the struggle, the Portuguese colonialists committed the massacre of Pijigiri, in which the dock workers of Bissau and the river transport strikers were the victims, of which, at a cost of 50 killed and over 100 strikers wounded, was a painful lesson for our people, who learned that there was no question of choosing between a peaceful struggle and armed combat. The Portuguese had weapons and were prepared to kill. At a secret meeting at the PAIGC leaders held at Bissau on 19 September 1959, the decision was taken to suspend all peaceful representations to the authorities in the villages and to prepare for the armed struggle. For that purpose, it was necessary to have a solid political base in the countryside. After 3 years of active and intensive mobilization and organization of the rural populations, PAIGC managed to create that basis in spite of the increasing vigilance of the colonial authorities. We are fighting so that insults may no longer rule our countries, martyred and scorned for centuries, so that our peoples may never be exploited by imperialists, not only by people with white skin, because we do not confuse exploitation or exploiters with the color of men's skins. We do not want any exploitation in our countries, not even by black people. We are not fighting against the Portuguese people, against individual Portuguese or Portuguese families, without ever confusing the people of Portugal in Portuguese colonialism. We have been forced to take up arms in order to extirpate from the soil of our African fatherland the shameful Portuguese colonial destination. To further emphasize this, another problem is how to isolate the enemy itself in relation to its people. Thus, since the beginning, in the context of our political resistance, we have remained clear that we don't struggle against the Portuguese people. Everyone in our party knows that. We do not struggle against the Portuguese or the Portuguese people. We struggle against Portuguese colonialism, against Portuguese colonialists. Cabral was responsible for the decision made by the PAIGC to oppose the use of terror. At the beginning of the struggle, there were comrades who, within the framework of the sort of armed struggle we were carrying out, suggested that we commit atrocities, but we rejected this. In our struggle, there are none of the things which have occurred in other African countries. Whatever the reasons of those Africans were, it is sufficient reason to kill women and children just because they are white. We have refused this once and for all. Why? Because we want to have a political resistance that will serve our people. We do not want a bloodthirsty people shedding blood for the sake of it. Perhaps Cabral's greatest achievement in this respect is that he succeeded in avoiding any ideological references likely to deter a potential source of support. In particular, by systematically refusing to define his position on the ideological spectrum, he ensured that the PAIGC would be one of the very few nationalist parties to maintain good relations with both the Soviet Union and China. Although Cabral was never officially welcome in France, where he was later banned, or in Britain, Italy, and Germany. Sorry, somebody in front of me. He eventually managed to gather support in other European countries. In the 60s, Sweden was the first Western country to give the PEIGC financial and material aid. Later, other Scandinavian countries followed. Throughout the war, Cabral continued to appeal to Western countries, and he succeeded in generating military support in the form of aid committees in most of them. Even as late as 1971, he was totally unwilling to be drawn into ideological statements. When he was asked in England whether the PEIGC ideology was based on or related to Marxism, Leninism, he said, he cautiously replied, "Is Marxism a religion? I am a freedom fighter. In my country, you must judge that from what I do in practice. If you decide it is Marxism, tell everyone that it's Marxism. But labels are your affair. We don't like those kind of labels." The party's rigid adherence to non-alignment enabled the Guinean nationalists to have good relationships with other wide range of countries, other than most other liberation movements. This, incidentally, remains obvious today. Guinea and Cape Verde receive foreign aid from all over the world, and because of their good relations with the West, their initial dependence on Eastern Bloc countries has lessened. Okay. I think we're approaching the end now. Amilcar Cabral was intimately tied to the group of students born in the Portuguese colonies. By their class origin, the latter were objectively drawn from humble stock, from an urban petty bourgeoisie. The more sensitive elements were aroused by the tangible facts of colonial exploitation operating at the level of the mass of the people, and whose effects, albeit to a lesser degree, they experienced in their material and social lives. Those who had reached the advanced training institutes, often at the cost of enormous financial sacrifices made by their families and by virtue of jockeying and assimilado vacancies, bore the stigmata of revolt. Armed with a privileged education, these assimilados were faced with a dilemma, either to struggle for their self-advancement in the framework of colonial society, or to arm themselves culturally to challenge and destroy the system of domination. In other words, it was a matter of choosing between two views of life, either individual assent by accepting the system's rules, or total rejection, in effect breaking away in order to open the way to freedom for the strata most oppressed by colonialism. At the end of the academic year in 1949, Amilcar Cabral returned for holidays to Cape Verde, firmly set on putting his ideas into practice, and first to reveal Cape Verde to the Cape Verdeans, the only possible introduction to liberty and knowledge of Africa in the world. On 8 September, he began a series of radio talks on geophysical aspects of the archipelago. Some thoughts on the subject of rain. It was an opportunity for Cabral to talk about the essential. He argued with conviction that Cape Verdeans had the means of taking charge of their own destiny. As a student, he turned himself into a teacher, calling on those with knowledge to enlighten those who do not know. He launched into his topic quickly and dealt with the basic question. The Capeverdians have the means to live from their land. They must therefore organize themselves to take account of their realities. The broadcast was soon banned by colonial authorities. But if one had to define a single influential aspect of Cabral's approach, perhaps it would be his insistence in the study of reality. Do not confuse the reality you live in with the ideas you have in your head, was a favorite theme of his seminars for party militants. Your ideas may be good, even excellent, but they will be useless ideas unless they spring from and interweave with the reality you live in. What is necessary is to see into and beyond appearances, to free yourself from the sticky grasp of received opinions, whether academic or otherwise. Only through a principled study of reality, of the strictly here and now, can a theory of revolutionary change be integrated with its practice to the point where the two become inseparable. This is what he taught. Today, our primary education is political. We cannot forget this fact. From early childhood, we must prepare our people to follow the struggle of the PAIGC, to teach them the basis of the struggle, the basis of the strengths of our party, about the interests and values of our party. We must give them the idea that the party is the guide, the light, and everything else. At the same time, we must teach them how to read and write and count and to make progress slowly. The nature of our education must be conditioned at each stage of our struggle by the historical moment of our life. We are all necessary to the struggle, but no one is indispensable. Today, I am proud because I am certain that, given the work that we have done together, if I went, left, died, or disappeared, there would be others in the party capable of continuing the struggle. If there were not the same case, we would not have achieved anything yet. A man who has achieved something which he alone can continue has achieved nothing. I should just like to make one last point about solidarity between the international working class movement and our national liberation struggle. There are two alternatives. Either we admit that there really is a struggle against imperialism which interests everybody, or we deny it. If, as it would seem from all the evidence, imperialism exists and is trying simultaneously to dominate the working class in all the advanced countries and smother the national liberation movements in all the underdeveloped countries, then there's only one enemy against whom we are fighting. And if we are fighting together, then I think the main aspect of our solidarity is extremely simple. It is to fight.